Football. No. Football. No, football. No, you know what? Let's just call it all football. The history of football, the name football itself, can be traced all the way back to the mob ball games or mob football games played around medieval Europe, predominantly in the British Isles. The word football itself is a combination of two words, foot and ball, which, contrary to popular belief, wasn't supposed to describe the act of using your feet to kick or move the ball. Rather, it was the title given to most peasant ball games by the aristocrats because the games were played on foot with a ball, as opposed to the horse riding sports games more often enjoyed by the aristocrats. These medieval mob football games were usually played between neighboring towns, with rules varying all around Europe, with some similarities being unlimited number of players on each team, a ball and some sort of a goal, which could range from just 2 goalposts in a field to the church window of the opposing town's team. Mob football games were brought into the Americas by the English settlers, however there was still no official rules or organization for these mob football games, and the towns in the Americas, just as back in England, played mob football games by their own rules. It wasn't until the 19th century when the mob football games started to be more organized, as intramural games of football began to be played on college campuses. However, just like mob football, the college football games differed widely in rules from college to college and still involved large masses of people. Princeton had a game called Balloon as early as the 1820s, and in Harvard the tradition of Bloody Monday began, where masses of sophomores would play a game of mob football against the freshmen. Dartmouth had a game called Old Division Football dating back to the 1830s. However, many of these college football games still were masses of people trying to advance a ball to a goal, oftentimes by any means necessary. Due to the natural brutality of these games, many of them were discontinued or standardized by the 1870s. What is considered the first official college football game was played in 1869 between Princeton and Rutgers universities. However, even though this is considered the first college football game played, the game itself didn't resemble football at all, and that is because they decided to play by the rules of London Football Association, precursor to association football. With all the colleges now trying to standardize the sport, it was still much of a house rules game where the visiting team had to always play by the house college rules, and each of these colleges had differing rule sets. It took the Canadian Montreal McGill University, which played by the rugby union rules, to influence the growing American football, which up until now looked more like association football, to become more standardized and brought it closer to looking like modern American football. It was in 1876 when representatives from Harvard, Columbia, Princeton, and Yale met in Massachusetts Massasoit Convention, where they standardized the rules of college football based very closely on rugby union rules. There were meetings of colleges before this to standardize the rules, but it was the Massasoit Convention that really brought all the colleges together and created a game that looked more like football today. It was also in the Massasoit Convention that the first American Intercollegiate Association was founded, with Harvard, Columbia, and Princeton being the first founders, and many colleges like Yale or Dartmouth joining later on. It was during the turn of the 19th century that many of the rules we associate with football were created by college coaches, either in Massasoit House Convention or many following conventions. The line of scrimmage, the snap, the player interference, and the down and distance rules were just a few of the new rules added to the already unique game of American football compared to other football or rugby games developing around the world. During the 1905-06 reforms, the forward pass became legal, and even though this is considered one of the main differences between football and rugby, the rule wasn't utilized very much during the football games of the early 20th century. The first wholly professional football game was played with the college football rules in 1895 between the clubs of La Trobe Athletic Association and the Jeannette Athletic Club. However, there were only few professional football games in these early times, as it was seen unethical to pay people for playing sports. Nonetheless, many football leagues started to be formed, but none of which will last for long. It took all the way till 1920 when the precursor of what is today NFL was born. It was called the American Professional Football Association, and it started as a loosely bound agreement between 14 football teams to play each other and select the winner at the end of the season. This league continued on evolving independently of college football, and that is why there are certain differences in today's college and professional football. As the NFL was expanding, a new significant rival league formed in 1960 called the American Football Association. This league started to hold traction and started to steal the audience and players from the NFL. So in 1966, the leagues formed a partnership and decided to hold a Super Bowl to decide which of the two best teams from each league should be the winner. Then in the 1970s, the AFL merged with the NFL, officially creating, with few exceptions, very much the National Football League we know today. To understand the history of football, you have to understand that since the start of the first college football convention to standardize the rules in the 1870s, it took about 100 years to come to a game we would recognize as modern football today. It took hundreds of college and professional league conventions with reforms and rule changes oftentimes happening on scale of decades rather than years. Modern football was born just as any other sport through years of adaptation and evolution to come where it is now, and it will most certainly go through many more changes going into the future just as it did in the past.